A top-of-the-line 35-year-old car that was famous with dictators and aristocrats has had years of journalism and reviews about the philosophical nuances of this 17-foot-long boat, and Doug has had time to find all of the quirks and or features, so let's approach this car from the engineering side. How is this car built, and how will ownership hold up on a $150,000 car that I paid $1,500 for, and that included service records and a new set of tires? It gets weird. Let's start with the engine. The 5.5-liter M117 single overhead cam V8 is an aluminum silicone alloy block called AluSil. Now this differs from the Nikasil blocks like you would see in Porsches and BMWs of the day. Instead of it being a coating on the cylinder wall, it's actually a casting, and they etch the surface of the cylinder, and that exposes the silicon, making it quite a bit stronger. Overall, the M117 seems to be one of the more reliable Mercedes engines ever built, at least on the bottom end. The top end suffers from a little bit of valve train issues in that they use plastic oil lines for the camshaft lubrication. They're a pretty easy replacement, but that's something to keep in mind. The oil change is a breeze, with the oil filter actually having a little handle on the top of it. It's not too fast at 270 horse and 300 pound-foot of torque, but it will get you up to about 100 miles an hour before a Paris tunnel, if that's your concern. It has ABS, an annoying seatbelt buzzer that is literally always on, and airbags that were supposed to be replaced in 1997, but I doubt they were. Suspension is another weird phenomenon once you're under here, but it seems to actually normal out once you kind of understand it. It has an upper and a lower ball joint, and then it has these trailing arm ball joints, which I actually just replaced because the old ones were pretty bad. And that seems to be the common failure point on these, although these upper control arms also can get a little bit expensive. Steering is interestingly not rack and pinion. It has 6 total ball joints and a steering rack that likes to leak, so keep an eye out for that. It also has these weirdly long lug nuts, which are weird and long. Has a lower and upper oil pan, like most Mercedes of the era, and this cool tensioning device for the smog pump, which I think is very cool, but wow, that's over-engineered in German. The factory exhaust system on it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different mufflers and catalytic converters on it. As you can see, this one was being held on with a bungee cord, and it still didn't work. So that's a thing. Moving to the rear suspension, we have these gigantic trailing arms. On the 560 and 500 chassis cars, these are cast aluminum. On the rest of the 126 chassis cars, they are stamped steel. Leading up to where the hub and assembly actually is, and then the little guide bar coming off the end of that goes to the rear hydraulic suspension proportioning valve. It's run by a hydraulic pump off of the distributor that sends lines back here and controls the height of the suspension with those rams that are buried within the shock tower. The common failure point on these seems to be either leaking struts or these nitrogen-filled accumulators that sit back here and, well, accumulate. Has these absolutely massive cush drives on both the diff side and the transmission side of the drive shaft. The 4G Tronic transmission was a 4-speed slush box that Mercedes put in absolutely everything. This one has 200,000 miles on it, and it shifts pretty good. Don't overfill them, and it actually has a transmission drain and a torque converter drain, which is very nice when you're used to working on Jaguars, which has neither. Saving the best for last is KE Jetronic.
The K-Jetronic fuel injection system provides continuous but varied amounts of fuel to the induction tract of each of the engine cylinders.
Developed by Bosch and used on a lot of early German cars, early German fuel-injected cars. This is KE fuel injection, which means that it is actually electronically controlled as well, mostly for Lambda. It works on the basic principle of having that center fuel distributor, which has pressurized fuel going into it from an electric fuel pump in the trunk, and then it has lines off of that to individual injectors on the motor. And the center of that fuel distributor right there has a metered pinion in it that moves up and down, and tiny microscopic flutes that line that, so the more air that it brings in puts fuel into the injectors, which puts fuel into the combustion chamber. It's a very interesting system, and a properly maintained one works fantastic. As you can imagine, as particulates and dirty fuel gets in there, or they've been improperly maintained, sometimes they can suffer from issues, but they can be fairly easy to diagnose, outside of that center fuel distributor being probably the most expensive component. You know, any flagship Mercedes made before 2000 has a problem with the clientele. Saddam Hussein owned a 560 SEL that shot flames out the side. It's a car for doctors, but it's also a car for dictators and lawyers. From the outside, it looks gigantic, and to be fair, it is, but in here it feels quiet, quaint, and comfortable. It's probably the 10 inches of sound deadening keeping you from the peasants outside. I mean, there's some leather squeaks, and I mean, there's a little bit more noise than you would hear in like a modern S-Class, but it's still fantastic in here. And I mean, even after 35 years, the leather feels supple. It's funny, I always say that any S-Class is what regular cars will be like in 20 years. And I feel like that's actually fairly true. Outside of a few gimmicks here and there, like the two-tone horn, it has all the features of an 07 Corolla, and I think that speaks a lot for the car, and it's way more comfortable. I mean, there's more legroom in that back seat than some Delta flights I've been on. It's an interesting car because when a lot of people ask me about what I think about older Mercedes, I usually tell them to not buy one out of warranty, and I still stand by that advice, because if you're not careful and you don't do your own maintenance, I mean, a used Mercedes will keep your children from going to college. But there's something really special about driving and especially working on cars that were really the peak of its time, the pinnacle of its time. It's interesting to see how they were built, and I mean the build quality, especially on these older German cars, is just fantastic. The 928 is another fan favorite of mine, and I guess to many, it's a big, boring blue sedan, but I mean, that's kind of the point. I mean, it's not a Rolls Royce. It's not that in your face about it, but it's still just as comfortable as one from that era. So, should you buy a top-of-the-line 30-year-old Mercedes for $1,500? Well, yes. Honestly, if you can do your own maintenance, it's a fantastic driving car, and I dearly love this thing. But it is going to be expensive to run, and to be completely honest, it has headlight wipers, which is fantastic. However, I cannot figure out how to get them to work. So, I guess that's the deciding factor. Anyways, back to the technical stuff next week. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and comment down below. And thank you for watching.